Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing okay. My name is Lucille and today I'm bringing you my September and October reading journal update. And I'm starting with my cover page. I had been thinking about that cover page for weeks, literally, because I had drawn this bird which is called a Blackburnian warbler, and I've called him my Halloween bird because with his little orange and black face, for me he looks like a little pumpkin. I really wanted to use that illustration on my cover page for September and October, even though we don't really get autumn colors until the very end of September and they don't really last the whole of October because we already get snow mid-October. So anyway, I wanted to have more fall colors in my life, so I decided to do that cover page. I wanted to do basically the same formula I had done for the last cover page with a little cluster collage on the left and the titles of the books on the right. I wanted to use those Dollarama sticker sheets, those ginkgo leaves, because I've used them in spreads in the past and I loved how they look like. And if you've seen my previous video, I'm trying to use up what I have instead of buying more stickers. For the background to my sticker, I used some brown paper, some book pages, and I also used my label maker to make the title, which is just September, October in French. I have one little tip when I use book pages for collages. I usually flip them so that the text is upside down because I find it distracting when you can easily read the text. For the purpose of this cover page, I printed a Blackburnian warbler bigger than what I have on my sticker sheets, because that's the advantage of being the creator of the illustration. I'm able to print the stickers however I want them. For the titles on the right, I didn't want to use the same frames I had used last time, so I went to my trusty graph paper notebook that's from the 70s, I believe. It was my great aunt, and I love the color and texture of this paper. And what I love to do is to tear the page from the wire binding and to keep the torn part with it because I think it looks more interesting. In the end, I will change this page off camera because the stickers from Dollarama are textured. I could see them popping up under the graph paper and it was disturbing me, and even 2 months later when I was finished with the page I couldn't take it, so I ended up changing it, but I'm not sure you'll be able to see it on camera. The first spread I'm doing is for Poppies of Iraq by Brigitte Findelke and Louis Trondheim. When I picked up that graphic novel, I didn't know it had been translated from the French into English, and I would have liked to have read it in French, but living in northern West Canada, it's a bit difficult to get French graphic novels in the library. Poppies of Iraq is a collection of comic strips that were published online and then were put in a paper format. Illustrations are all little squares that I put next to each other, and I'm sure that worked well on a website or on a phone. But when those webcomics are put in a paper format, I always find it a bit difficult to follow the story or to see links between the pictures. I don't really know how to explain it, but the web format doesn't translate well to me on a paper format, especially when it was little square images that are usually depicting a very short story. So you are left with a lot of short stories and you don't really have a red thread between them, so it can give a little disjointed feeling. Brigitte Findelke has an Iraqi dad and a French mom, and she was born in Iraq. She spent her childhood there before emigrating to France. And in this volume she tells us about her childhood, about moving to France and going back to Iraq to visit in her early adulthood. And she also tells the story of how her parents met and how her mom adapted to live in Iraq. And it was such an interesting graphic novel. And despite the issues I had with the format, I really enjoyed that graphic novel. I had never read anything from Iraq before, and it was such an interesting story. Brigitte was born in the 70s or 80s, I'm not sure, and she tells the story of how Iraqi society is evolving with changes of regime and how it interacts with its neighbors, and how Brigitte saw her country when she was growing up there and how she felt moving. And if you can get your hand on it, I would highly recommend it. For the spread, I obviously wanted to pull stuff from the cover and from the title, and I knew I had some poppy stickers from Journal Say, as well as some leaf stickers that would tie in with the cover and also with the Iraqi flag. I didn't add much more to the spread apart from lettering the title in a similar manner as on the cover, and I didn't spend too much time on the lettering, which is unlike me because I always want to do a mock-up in pencil and it takes ages, but this time around maybe I trusted myself more, or maybe I was just tired and I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but I lettered it more quickly and I really like the result. The second spread I'm doing is for Murder Amongst the Pyramid, which is an audiobook. And at first I thought I was going to do a double page spread for it, but I waited to do that spread a month, I think, after having listened to the audiobook, and I didn't have so many thoughts. I was really happy to be able to use that washi tape for that spread because I bought it almost 2 years ago and I haven't used it much because it's much more yellow than what I would like, but it goes perfectly with a story set in the beginning of the 20th century in Egypt. I made sure to use the bit of tape that had Egypt on it. I used my silhouette portrait to print some stickers. I looked for some illustrations of Egypt of the time to use, and I ended up choosing this black and white etching of women visiting pyramids, and I thought that was what the image depicted at first, but looking at it again when I was editing the video, I realized that it was a depiction of ladies stealing from monuments in Egypt. And, well, if that doesn't summarize well the period of colonization and the stealing of antiquities by foreigners, well, I don't know what did. For the title, I copied the font of the cover and I like how it turned out. I was really happy that these two spreads were next to each other because I think they turned out well. Murder Among the Pyramids is the first volume in a series of investigations focused on a lady called Blix, and I don't know where that name comes from because I've never heard about it. It's the beginning of the 20th century after World War I, if I'm not mistaken, and Blix is she's not a journalist per se, she's a traveler, and when she comes back to Britain or when she's traveling, she does conferences and she talks about her travels and she has a slideshow, and she is going to Egypt to accompany a lady that's on her tour, and she gets embroiled into a murder investigation. And all in all, I really enjoyed it. I was not expecting it because I listened to an audiobook by Sarah Rosette last year and I enjoyed it, but it wasn't amazing. But as soon as this one started, I loved the setting. I loved the research that went behind it, and even though I didn't love the main character, I found that the plot was interesting and I really looked forward to listen to it, and I missed it when I wasn't listening to it. Obviously, when you absorb something from that era, from the colonizer perspective, it's quite creepy because you have all these white colons that are there on holiday or to live in hotels and who talk about the native population as if they are the anomaly. They talk about the native quarters in the city as if this was not the norm, as if the European quarters were not the anomaly in Cairo, and the way people are talked about was really, well, it was disgusting, honestly, but it was interesting to see that Rosette had displayed the way people would have felt at the time, from supporting the empire, from being a bit more skeptical about it, or supporting the native Egyptian population. I would have listened to the second volume of the series if I had had it, but Murder Amongst the Pyramid was left from last year when I had a free tryout of Audible, and that was one of the books I took, but I didn't want to pay more for it because the prices of audiobooks is ridiculous, and I'd rather not support Audible and Amazon, so I'll be happy if the next audiobook is available on Libby. The spread I'm doing right now is for Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. I've heard about T. Kingfisher for months, a year it seems, and we didn't have any of her books at the library except for one that wasn't really appealing to me, but a patron requested Thornhedge. It's a novella, and the summary sounded so interesting because we discovered that we're following a frog. The frog is the hero of the story, not the princess, and the frog is trying to keep the princess in the tower, and the premise was so intriguing to me, and I love reading novellas that I just jumped on it, and I ended up really loving it. Admittedly, I loved the end less than the beginning. I really hoped that some things would have been different, but it was such a rich experience. T. Kingfisher's writing was beautiful. It was as if every word was exactly where it was supposed to be, and the sentences just followed one another so seamlessly, and the imagery was interesting. The setting, the way the classic fairy tale was put on its head was also very interesting, and I do not regret reading it. I also enjoyed there was no romantic subplot in there, and I really liked the heroine, despite the fact that you really set out to root for her, and that's something that really bothers me. When you create a character that suffered so much, that's not living a very nice life, and you have to root for Toadling. That's the name of the character. You have to root for her because I don't see how you couldn't root for her, and I don't like when I'm forced to root for a character. I thought it was a bit too much. She really piles on Toadling. She really is a sad little toad, and I couldn't help but feel for her. I wish that the epilogue had not been included because I liked the way the book ended without it, but it's okay. I will try to read something else of T. Kingfisher, and if you have any recommendation where in the story the romance is not the focal point, I would appreciate it, because I've heard in videos that sometimes it's prevalent in her stories, so if you have any recommendation of that order, I would appreciate it. For the title, I decided once more to copy the font of the cover, and I left quite a bit of the process of lettering it because I wanted to show how long it can take, because sometimes when you watch videos you see people just lettering stuff beautifully. It feels so discouraging to see how seemingly effortlessly they do it, so I just wanted to show you how I did it. For the layout, I was imagining when I was reading that I would find a beautiful illustration. I was thinking specifically of an etching of a lone tower that would represent the setting of the story, but I couldn't find what I was looking for, and when I was decluttering my sticker book of botanical stickers, I saw that big tree with the bushes with the flowers, and I thought that to replace the tower that would go great. And I also wanted to include another pink flower to have it tie in with the little bush that you have at the foot of the tree, but I end up removing it later because I didn't think it suited the page. I replace it with a leaf sticker that's also from this book, and I also altered the text slightly so it wrapped better around the illustration. I also had printed a vintage illustration of the Sleeping Beauty myth, because Thornhedge is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty. I wish I could have included it on the spread, but because it was black and white and the trio was in color, I didn't think it suited the spread. The last two spreads I'm doing are going to be one-page spreads for two audiobooks. One is called Elementary She Read, and the other one is Hexes and Honeybuns. I also did a last spread off camera for Mate by Ailey Hazelwood, the sequel to Bride, and I'm just going to quickly talk about it right now because I won't have time in the rest of the video, and you will see the spread at the end of the video during the flip through. I was excited about Mate because I had enjoyed Bride to my surprise, surprise because I haven't been enjoying romances or paranormal romances for years now, but Bride had surprised me because it had a plot that was deceptively complex and that mainly had nothing to do with romance, but then it was extremely explicit and I did not quite like those passages. But still, when the end arrived and I see a sequel would be made, I was still excited because it sounded fun. But contrary to Bride, I really did not like Mate. It started with a premise that was quite tiresome to me. The main character, she's hiding because she's sick and she doesn't want people to know, and it will lead to misunderstandings and lies, and it's a tedious plot that does not interest me anymore, and I did not find the rest of the novel as interesting, so it was the only thing I wanted to read at the time, so I was grateful that it had been published, but yeah, it wasn't a success. And I decided to do the spread for Hexes and Honeybuns before Elementary She Read because I wanted to. I don't quite remember when I got Hexes and Honeybuns. It was on my Audible account and I was looking for something to listen to. Maybe I got it last year because it was free, but I don't quite remember, and I certainly did not remember that it was the third book in a series of audiobooks. Hexes and Honeybuns is a short audiobook by Danielle Garrett. It follows a character I've forgotten the name of, which can tell you how much I enjoyed it, who is a witch living in one of the US's secret magic towns. And the premise was interesting. She's a journalist, but she has had to move back home in this magic town and work part-time at the family's bakery, and she's trying to find herself, start a career as a journalist. And despite having not listened to the first two audiobooks, I didn't have too much trouble understanding what had happened and enjoying the beginning of it. It was entertaining, but the main character she was so unmotivated. She wants to be a journalist and she stumbles into this story where a lady convicted of killing her husband contacts her and tells her she is innocent, and she wants Rosella, that's the name of the character, to investigate. And despite the fact that there's a potential innocent person in prison, Rosella only thinks about her boyfriend, and she sporadically remembers she has to do some research. She goes to visit the convicted lady. She has to leave the room because her boyfriend calls, so as a professional journalist she can't continue the interview, and she doesn't tell her what she's going to do. She goes back home, she moans about her boyfriend, and she moans about her cousin that she hates, and it was all a bit juvenile, and in the end the solution to the enigma wasn't super interesting, and it got me curious in the other two volumes, honestly. And it's fair that Rosella could be a bad journalist, it's character development, but I was happy that it was a short story because the narrator was doing her best. She was having the time of her life, but she was making such weird voices for men, and I left the spread super simple using a few of Marigona Sully stickers and lettering the title in a weird font, but in the end I think it's fine. Last spread I'm doing on video is for Elementary She Read by Vicky Delaney, and what I didn't show on camera was that I started by doing the spread gluing one of my vintage craft paper on the page, but I had already done a spread with this vintage paper in my previous journal and did not end up liking it, so I couldn't go through with it, and I glued a bit of spare paper on top of it. It's slightly too narrow for the spread, so I have a bit of a weird space near to the binding, and I think I should have managed it differently, but that's how it is. I still wanted the vintage feel for it, so I used this paper tape from Journal Say, and I don't know why this is one of my favorite tapes because it's just craft graph paper, but I think it just goes well with anything. I used even more Marigona Sully stickers to go with it, and the sticker sheets with those brown sepia toned books worked very well with the tape and with the book. Elementary She Read is a book that's the first in a series following a character called Gemma that's taken over her great uncle's, or her uncle, I don't remember, bookshop that's specialized in Sherlock Holmes, and she ends up in possession of a rare Sherlock Holmes manuscript and then a murder, and she has to investigate because she's one of the police's main suspects. And And when I was saying that Rosella from the previous audiobook was annoying, Gemma really takes the cake. She is this Brit living in the US, and how superior British tea is to Americans, and how they don't understand what a crumpet or a scone is. And as an immigrant myself, I can relate to some of the feelings, but it was really hard to sympathize with her because she was so annoying and was sounding so haughty. The narrator was clearly British and was trying to do some American accents for the other characters, but there were such cliche accents that all the American characters sounded like either vapid bimbos or Texas oil magnates. And the story was quite old-fashioned. I think the author was in her 60s or 70s when she wrote it. She was an experienced writer, and this really read like a formulaic crime story, and the conclusion was just, oh, she did it because she's crazy. And the way Gemma was talking about other women was really cringy. She was supposed to be in her 30s, but she had the voice of a 60-year-old, which is kind of relatable, but it was hard not to see the 60-year-old author behind her 30-year-old character. There were so many inconsistencies in both the character development and the plot that I stopped several times listening to it, but I kept coming back to it because I wanted to have the final word of the story. Maybe it would be less annoying if you try to read it rather than listening to it, but it's not a book that I would recommend. And I'm going to finish the video by updating my ABC challenge. I had a few covers to add, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to finish it at the end of the year. I never set up those challenges because I want to finish them necessarily, but I would like to try to find a few more reads that could count, and I include graphic novels and albums in it, so that makes it a bit more easy. But finding a book or even an album that would count for the letter Z or X is quite difficult. So if you have any recommendations for authors that have the last name starting with an X or a Z, please tell me, because I'm quite desperate now. And here it is. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm quite excited by some of the spreads I did for November and December, because as it happens, I'm finishing that journal at the end of the year, and I will be setting up a new journal for 2026. And I'll see you next time.